participants. We have with us today, we're going to be talking about the art of cold case investigation, investigative techniques that will help folks not only with cold case work, but also their current investigations. Our guest speaker today is Tim Cooper. He's a detective and canine officer with the Ada County Sheriff's Department. Tim has 23 years of law enforcement experience, and currently he works with Ada County Sheriff's Department for the last 11 years. Tim works the cold cases for Ada County. He has solved several cold cases that are significant and high profile, and I have worked with Tim with the Sheriff's Office working on cold cases, and we have a current cold case that is Tim, would you say we've solved it, but we're waiting on some arrests? Would you say that's where we're at?
That would be a fair assessment of where we are, yeah.
Okay. All right. Tim, I'm really proud to have Tim here. He's an excellent investigator. His mind and his thought process is something that we'll all get value from. So, Tim, I'm going to let you take it away, beginning the art of cold case investigation. I'm going to move to the first slide, and I'll let you go ahead.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me, Mike, and thanks to everyone that's joining with us. Hopefully my radio won't go off or someone won't knock on my door here. I'm in a parking lot. We just got done with EVOC training, so I've been standing in the wind. My hair's all screwed up, and I'm on my way to a search warrant right after this. So we're kind of in that in-between lunch hour, so hopefully this goes smooth. But if you see me looking off to my right here, it's because I have a laptop and I just can't quite see the notes on my cell phone here with Zoom, so I'm going to be glancing over at that. But with that, yeah, let's jump into it. So the case that I was asked to discuss today is the Snake River Jane Doe case. You'll forgive me, it's been a minute since I've been immersed in this case, but there was a time where for about a year and a half, this was an everyday thing. So have some recall of some of the particulars, but if you have questions, if I don't have the answers immediate, if you want to get with me offline, that might be an easier way if there's specific information you want to know about. But this case goes back to 1974. It is a Ted Bundy homicide. In 1989, Bundy confessed to investigators from the AG's office here in Idaho, just 2 days before his own execution, that he had picked up a hitchhiker on I-84 just on the outskirts of Boise. He was going east. And he ends up driving her a short distance into what we believe into Elmore County, where he murders her. He rapes her, murders her, and then dumps her body into the Snake River. And so a lot of people at that time, they thought, well, is he making this up? Is he trying to get a stay of execution, that kind of thing? I don't think so. Going back to the governor of Florida's statements at that time that were made widely public, he said, if Bundy could bring his victims back, we're still going to fry him. So I don't think Bundy was counting on a stay of execution. And as it turns out, he spent the 2 days before his execution speaking about homicides that he had never talked about before, disclosing details about them. And many of those have been closed and even in some cases remains discovered as a result of those confessions. And so the case we're going to discuss happens to be one of those, and that's our Snake River Jane Doe. So as you'll see, 2024, I got actively involved in the case. I'd actually heard about it before in years past working here in Ada County. I work interdiction out on the interstate as well as my other part of my assignment. And so I would have truck drivers who listen to podcasts and things like that come up to me at different times and say, hey, did you guys ever find the body that, Ted Bundy confessed to? And so that's kind of how I first heard about it. In 2024, as the year continued on, we did a few months of investigating. When we located the actual scene, we got the original tapes that Bundy confessed on, the old cassette tapes. We transcribed those. We interviewed different people, authors, Bundy experts, if you will. We got quite a bit of information, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Old aerial satellite info. We kind of had a good working case file going. But then what we did is we wanted to go to the public. So in November 2024, we actually did a podcast appealing to the public. Hey, if you have a missing sister, mother, daughter, friend, loved one, please get in touch with us. If any of this sounds familiar, if she was hitchhiking in the summer or fall of '74 and so on. So that, Mike, you can move to the next slide if you would. We got several tips, which I may have time to get into some of those as we move on, that would go to substantiate some of what Bundy discussed in his confession. But that's kind of how we got into this case. And Mike, I think we might have skipped a slide there. I don't know. Maybe it's just on my end.
Yeah, this one's just the
Oh.
overall what we're going to hit on. If you wanted to highlight those, or we could go right to that first slide that you were talking about your opportunistic intelligence.
Sure. So you'll see on here, Mike's got an 8-point technique playbook here. Opportunistic intelligence. We'll talk about that. I'll let you guys kind of read through these. The one that I really like is geographic profiling. There's for some of you, if you want to write his name down, if you don't already know about Dr. Osmo, OSMO, he is a geographic profiler. He used to be a cop, excuse me, and he ended up furthering his education and becoming a forensic profiler. And he specializes in geographic profiling. And he's written some work, some books, amazing stuff. I highly encourage, if you haven't already gotten some of Dr. Osmo's works, maybe look into that. But we will.
Tim, what I'm going to do also is for those that'll send me a message through PIA, I will send this deck, this slide deck out, so they don't have to write every single category down. It'll help with training.
Sure. Yeah. And I saw a question just popped up on the spelling. It's OSMO. And I believe his first name is Ken. I could be wrong on that, but he used to work out of the Canadian provinces. He was with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, I believe, and worked up in Montreal and that area. So, so you can move on to the next one. Excuse me. So getting into opportunistic intelligence gathering, I mentioned the truck drivers. This isn't the only cold case. Excuse me, I've been a little under the weather lately. This isn't the only cold case I've had come my way as a result of public interest. That happens. I'm sure those of you who've been in PI work for a while, you get cold contacted by people who say, hey, what happened to my sister, my father, what have you. It happens to us too. The truck drivers, excuse me, Mike.
Dog hair.
Yeah, a little bit. Stay conversational. If as long as someone's willing to give me information, I'm willing to take it. Even if it sounds far-fetched. When this first came my way, it was like, well, surely Ted Bundy, they must have investigated that. As it turns out, by the time I first heard about this, Ted Bundy wasn't even in CODIS yet. He didn't come into CODIS until I think 2015, something like that. So just kind of goes to show you, sometimes we're a little behind the curve. Truck drivers, they're kind of my eyes and ears in the drug world out on the interstate. I don't normally predict they're going to come up to me with cold case information, but that was the case here. So you can move on, Mike, to the next slide. So this is an interesting one, source credibility assessment. So yeah, we are evaluating a serial killer. Believe it or not, people who commit mass murder sometimes tell lies, right? They do other crimes. Bundy was also a kleptomaniac. He stole things from stores just for the thrill of it. That was his, his way of, I guess, keeping himself entertained in between serial homicides. He did other things too, but yeah, you got to test their credibility. In the narcotics world, we have a variety of ways we can test a snitch and see if, we can vet their information, if some of what they're telling us is reliable or not. But when you're talking about Ted Bundy, and he's now deceased by the time I get the case, you're really limited to what's already available. And so in my case, it was a matter of reading books. I think I read over a dozen Bundy books. I even became friends with some of the authors of those books. I reached out to his appellate attorney, Penny. I tried reaching out to a lot of different people who actually had contact with him. Um, I had to test his credibility. When Bundy says, for instance, that I pulled her into the woods, as you'll learn later, this specific geographical region, I wouldn't describe it as woods. There's a tree line, there's a river, but what does woods mean? Well, Woods to Bundy in previous interviews, he would talk about the woods behind his house growing up. Well, that was just a field with a couple trees at best. So woods was a word that Bundy would use frequently that didn't necessarily mean the woods that you and I might think about when we go camping up in the mountains. And that was kind of unusual to me how Bundy would use that word, because Bundy indeed did dump a lot of his victim bodies in mountainous regions, such that you would think, okay, when he says woods, I know what he's talking about. So a lot of research had to be done on Bundy's language, his word choice, his tone, inflection, his timbre when he talked, what he would get excited about, where he would leave omissions, the things he doesn't say, and so to do that, I got in touch with the daughters of two past psychiatrists that had they had amassed hundreds of hours of Bundy interviews. And they said, yeah, our dad preserved all that on cassette tape. Do you want it? I said, absolutely. And so I would get home and I would work out for about a year in the gym with my headphones in, with my old cassette tape deck, the kind I had in school that I'd run the wires up my sleeve and listen to. And I would work out to Ted Bundy talking. And that's really weird. But that's what I did for about a year. So just to get to know the guy.
That's a killer workout, Cooper.
That's a, yeah, it's a very killer workout for sure. No pun. So you got here number 3, looking for internal consistencies. There were errors actually in Bundy's 1 hour confession tape that he gave to Idaho investigators that were made by the investigators that Bundy actually corrected them on. East-west issues, certain things to do with the interstate being under construction. So it was kind of cool after I had kind of that baseline on who Bundy was and how he communicated, to be able to go back and listen to the confession again and kind of pick it apart from this newfound angle of knowing Bundy a little better. So I think it's really important in these investigations to absolutely test the credibility of the people who are giving you information. And that doesn't just have to mean, suspects. It can be victims. It can be witnesses. We really do need to vet the information we're getting, because if it's a garbage in, garbage out type thing, we may not have a case. It's important to test that stuff. And then corroborate it, as it says, number 4, independently. We were certainly able to do that, as I mentioned, through the tapes. We also got a photo from his former girlfriend up in Washington. We got gas receipts from investigators in Washington that actually corroborated that he was, in fact, here on the day at around the time at a gas station getting fuel. Around the same day and time that he suggested that he had murdered our Jane Doe. So it really started to help us gathering all this information just in so much as we were able to corroborate. And I see somebody posting it really was incredible that the receipts did last that long. There was an investigator up in Washington named Bob Keppel, and he's since passed on. He also became a PhD. Some of the cops that worked these cases went on to further their education because they realized, wow, I've been talking to source material here that could affect cases, the world over if we don't put pen on paper and get this out to law enforcement. So they became instructors, PhDs to do this, and Bob is one of those. Bob was really good at preserving the receipts, and he's the one I would give credit to for doing that. And he's actually the reason why Bundy confessed to us in the first place. Just a side note, Bob was working the Green River homicides, Gary Ridgway. And Bundy actually reached out to him, having been interviewed by Keppel before, and he said, "Hey, Bob, do you need help with that case? I might be able to offer some insight." And so Bob, of course, didn't predict that Bundy would give him the name of the Green River Killer, but he was all for playing into Bundy's ego and getting him to talk, such that maybe he would confess to more homicides. And it paid off, a few years of doing that. And that's how we got this confession and several others. So good question on the receipts. If you want to move to the next slide there, Mike. Physical evidence corroboration, same kind of thing. And let's go to 9. There we go. Yeah. We talk about the gas receipts and paper trails don't lie. That's so true. When we get a signed written statement from someone, or back then in that time, we didn't have CCTV cameras coming out as much. Receipts, P&O sheets, log books, things like this, journals, personal journals. This was how you confirmed things people said, and as far as timeline and the specific metrics and of where they were and when. So we did use the receipts as one form of documentary evidence. But the girlfriend I mentioned earlier, she actually had a photo. Now, mind you, Bundy confessed, he said it was the early part of September that he was driving out here, moving from Washington to Utah, that he came through Boise. He didn't know the exact day at first, but his girlfriend had a photo that was dated September 2nd, and it was him with his Volkswagen loaded to the ceiling with his personal possessions, and it was a goodbye photo he was taking before he hit the road. So September 2nd gave us our first glimpse at a confirmed timeline. Then we look at the receipts; those two things, match up. They align very well with one another. So now we have a photo to add to that. And I can hopefully we'll have time. I can tell you about some other witness statements that we got later on from the podcast that also went to that. We had somebody who had a birthday on September 2nd and had some very distinct memories. We had another person whose wife had just died, and she had always talked about the first part of September when they first met up at the lake, and the creepy guy in the Volkswagen. So pretty interesting stuff. So you put all that together, as Mike has pointed out here, and you get a geographic window. You also get a very good timeline, and you can start triangulating from there. Obviously, if something comes into play that throws a wrench in all of that, then that's something you have to deal with. You have to follow the evidence wherever it goes. But in this case, it's quite gone the other way. Everything's really aligned real well, and that's why I do take his confession to be quite authentic. We can go to 4, Mike. Contextual and historical analysis. So trying to reconstruct the past to understand what people saw. Um, this is a case, as everyone's probably seen at some point in their life, if you have any interest in true crime, there's no shortage of Bundy documentaries. I was in one. There have been probably 100 or more. There's no shortage of Bundy books out there. They've written one now on this exact case here in Boise. It's called Outskirts of Boise. It's free on Kindle. I don't know. Some guy from Australia wrote it. There's so much Bundy lore out there. Um, again, going back to testing credibility, some of the authors just want to get a book on the shelf and hope to make some money at their Barnes and Noble or whatever. You do have to test the information that's out there. Sometimes it's been as much of an impediment in this case as it's been a resource. Reading all the books, watching all the documentary material that's been produced, and that's why I mentioned earlier meeting the authors. I like to get on the phone with them and say, hey, page 364, tell me about that. What citation material do you have? Prove it. I don't have the luxury of taking a educated guess. So the historical analysis on this has been deep. And this one slide that I'm going to get into isn't even going to scratch the surface, but we will talk about a couple things here. The big thing, the road construction. So in this 1 hour confession, investigators were given 1 hour each by his attorneys. This was a marathon confession by Bundy in the last 2 days, such that they actually had to fly people in from several different states, each investigator getting an hour. So when Bundy starts telling us not about one, but about two murders that he committed off of I-84 through his passing to and from Washington to Utah, they were firing questions at him and he was answering them as quickly as he could. But one of the confusing pieces was he's talking about traveling eastbound to Utah and there's telephone poles on the side of the road. You can pull off and drive right down to the Snake River on this little pavement that turns to dirt road. He's saying that it's a 2-lane. He's saying all these things that just simply do not match Interstate 84 as we know it. So we go back into historical records. I talk about networking. I get in touch with the Elmore County Sheriff, recently retired, Rick Layer. Rick was a sheriff there for decades, and he started his career there in '73. So I said, Rick, this doesn't make sense. He says, well, yeah, Tim, that's because I-84 was under construction from, like 72 to 76. And so during that time, we were rerouting traffic onto old US 30, which has telephone poles. You can pull off down to the river on these paved areas. Well, another thing Bundy said was there was a railroad trestle and there was a creek that ran to the left underneath the trestle. And so that was another benchmark that we're working with. So I go down there and I take old Rick Layer smoking a pack of Camels and eating his M&Ms. And we walk down, we find an area where there's, he mentioned it was right after the Snake River came into view. And so we find such an area. We find a little dirt access road that goes off by the telephone poles off old US 30. We get out on foot. We start chainsawing little trees with the permission of ITD, and a railroad trestle comes into view. And as we walk down, cutting through, spiders' nests and everything else, I actually jumped over. Well, Rick stepped on the snake, and then I jumped over it. It's always the second guy with the snake if you're walking around down there. So I do battle with the snake. We get down under the trestle, and there's a creek dumping into the Snake River, and on it went. And so again, testing credibility with the contextual historical piece is very important. So Bundy's errors were actually accurate descriptions. They were perceived as errors by original investigators, but it turns out he's actually telling the truth. And what was really scary when I was down there, now Rick Layer had a lot of recoveries in the Snake River over 40 plus years as being sheriff. He never had a body that he didn't find. In other words, a body never went into the snake that Rick didn't recover, either dead or alive. His office always recovered the body. So he was pretty tore up when he knew about this. He had listened to the tapes, and he was pretty upset that there had never been a search effort for Jane Doe. So we did get aerial footage or aerial images from the U.S. Geological Survey Institute, I believe it's called, old spy satellite images, and we were able to lay those over what is the location today. And one image we got was actually from October of '74, so just within 30 days of when this homicide reportedly happened. And we got with the geosciences department, trying to get more historical information. The cubic feet per second of the water flow going through at that time of the year, how many blowouts there's been, how many floods there's been. You get out on foot in this area, you see trees turned upside down, reburied in the soil. There's been some flooding. There's been the landscape has changed. So those all became important investigative pieces as well. Let's move on, Mike, to the next one if we can. And I'm sorry, I know I'm kind of rushing through this. I want to get through before my voice is completely gone. And if you have any questions at the end. Um, this is one of my favorite pieces, geographic profiling. When you're talking about behavioral memory, we do what's called cognitive interviews. I teach for, I work with Interview Interrogation Institute. And behavioral memory is an interesting animal to try to lasso. We've had people in classes that can remember their first license plate 20, 30 years back, if we do enough behavioral memory exercises. It's not always that clean. It's not always that easy. Bundy is trying to, in the confession, he's trying to remember something that at that point, we're talking 1989, he's confessing, had happened 15 years earlier in 74. Others, like his appellate attorney, she wrote a book a few years later. By the time we talked to her, it's 40 years plus, So trying to get the exact verbiage, and this is what frustrated initial investigators. Bundy was talking about, well, I remember picking her up near ranch style houses along the interstate. And they're saying, ranch style houses? Where would that be? As I mentioned before, there's a fellow wrote a book out in Australia. He's convinced that it was this specific exit where there used to be ranch style houses. And I'm saying, no way, Jose, because as it happens right across the street from those, there's a major international airport that I think Bundy would have mentioned. So it's the omissions as well. Bundy omitted that detail if that's where it was. I think it was a little further down the road at a different exit. We won't get too far in the weeds on that, but it is important to listen to their landmarks, listen to what they're saying. Replay it again for them. An exercise we like to do is start from the end, go back to the beginning. I wish they had time to do that. These were competent investigators. I'm sure they knew that old technique. It's a great cognitive interviewing technique, and to try to elicit more memory when you do things chronologically and then backwards. A lot of times you get those extra pieces. But again, they had 60 minutes. So a technique you might be able to use when you're not under the gun on time, but unfortunately, I don't think they were able to do that. Discrepancies. There was, as I mentioned, I kind of already covered that, the Interstate 84 US 30 discrepancy, but we worked that out. I'm going to kind of move on from there. The construction. Rick remembered the China Wall was not far from this location. He remembers being posted up on overtime shifts while they constructed that wall, and he could actually look right down to the railroad trestle where this body was dumped. Had a lot of stories about tweakers that would go under the trestle, and he'd check out on cars and get warrants down there. So he's real familiar with that area. But we were able to generally identify the area as Eisenman Road, at the very least southeast of the Boise Airport, where he probably picked up our Jane Doe. So those of you familiar with our area, you'll know where that is. But there certainly are and were back then ranch-style houses. And I think we can move on to the next slide there, Mike. Deep dive research. We did a records deep dive, and we did a sonar deep dive, several of them with the dive team. I don't know if I'll have time to discuss what happened there, but let's talk about records. There are so many. I'm actually right now currently sitting in a parking lot that I was in the first time I met Mike Rossi over the phone, and he mentioned, "Hey, have you looked at the insurance claims records for old crashed vehicles? The Bureau of what is it? The National Bureau of Insurance
National
Claims."
Insurance Crime
crime
NICB. Yeah.
NICB, yeah. Looking for an old VIN that was, for lack of a, for make a long story short, it was crucial to the next steps in this particular homicide investigation. And yes, the National Insurance Crime Bureau. Well, as it turned out, even though I can't remember the acronym, I have a good friend over there named Jeff Hall who works at the NICB, and I had worked with Jeff on previous cold cases dealing with, insurance claims. The husband killed the wife for a big payout type thing, and so I called him, and sure enough, he had pictures 20 years, 25 years old of our suspect vehicle, the tires that were on it, the tire tread was important, all of this. I would say that was kind of an archival research records deep dive on that case. With this case, and that's, by the way, a great resource for investigators. If you ever have questions, get with Mike. He knows folks over there as well. You're free to reach out to me. Great resource. When you're talking about a Ted Bundy 1974 Idaho abduction microfilm, yeah, we immediately went to our microfilm. We had Laserfiche. We were actually in the process at this time in 2024, 2025 of getting all of our old microfilm, over 1,600 reels, digitized. And that was a very laborious, painstaking process. But we were thinking, well, we don't have a Jane Doe that specifically matches the description provided by Bundy in NCIC, in MUPS, in the Missing Unidentified Persons System. And in fact, NCIC didn't come online until a year after um, this abduction, and MUPS didn't come online until I think 83. So we were really behind. I saw a question there: how long does it take to go through a microfilm reel? 9 hours would be the answer that I averaged on microfilm reels. Now I can get through the equivalent of a reel in about 2.5 with our digitized version. So still a very laborious process, and it's something we're still working through. But we needed to find out who Jane Doe was. We still have not. I'm going to tell you right now, this is a painstaking process, one that I firmly believe in. I believe that before my career is over, we'll have an answer, because we're just not going to stop until we get it. But was she? Did she live on an Indian reservation? Was she in? Because there, you don't have. Even today, there's problems in the federal database in statting missing persons. They don't have a box for that. And Bureau of Indian Affairs are taking missing persons reports, and they don't have that box to check. And so when that's not checked, it creates problems for us. We've looked into that. Bundy described her as, he believed, a Caucasian female, possibly even a juvenile between 15 and 18. So we go looking at old foster home records. We start looking, as I mentioned, microfilm. Are there missing persons reports that have never been entered into MUPS? Folks, I've had 6 of them in my cold case career. 6 people who I identified subsequent, they were Jane Does or John Does. Come to find out, when we found out who they were, they'd been missing for years. No friends or family, coworkers, no one ever bothered to get them entered in. Or they tried, and law enforcement said, oh, you got to wait 48 hours or whatever, and they never tried again. Things like that have happened. There's what's called the M&Ms, the missing missings. There was a study done in 2004 of foster children, over 2,500 of them that had gone missing. Come to find out, were never reported by foster homes, foster families, organizations who were charged with taking care of these kids. They were never reported missing around the United States. Over 450 of those ended up being homicide victims. So that just goes to show you, that's 2004 on. So you go back 30 years, you could have a hell of a problem on your hands trying to identify somebody. So we've worked very hard trying to pull records from everywhere we can think. And I could spend a whole nother hour talking about that. Obviously, I don't have time. But suffice it to say, we got an offline search. The FBI gave us offlines from just missings or people querying runaways, ATLs, BOLs, BOLOs from August, or excuse me, I think we went from July or June to December 74. There's over 16,000. So I'm going down that list, trying to see who's alive, who's been found, and who hasn't. Crazy. Let's jump up to number 7 there, Mike. the never give up mindset. 16,000 names. You can't let that intimidate you. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, right? You got to go through the list. You gotta. I don't know how else to say it. This isn't a pat on the back. This isn't a. It's just the reality of cold case work, of PI work, of investigative work. Tenacity. I mean, you have to keep going. You get five. I've got right now uh, six police agencies telling me I'm dead wrong on an issue, and one of them telling me, no, this is the way to go. And we're going to keep going with it. Um, and we're not going to be, intimidated directly or in the form of innuendo to stop a homicide investigation because some people say, no, we already checked that out. No, double check it. Double check all your leads because what we found out in that case, and I won't get into it, we're sitting on a gold mine of evidence right now that says that's not going to age well for those agencies. So never give up. Take the case seriously. I don't think I have to tell anybody that. When you bring it to closure, that is your primary goal, as Mike has put here. Um, there are, Jane has a family. She's got friends, loved ones, who I mentioned in the podcast. They want answers. They're still out there somewhere. There's always still a family member or a friend who says, "Oh wow, I never thought, that I'd find out what happened to him or her." Or some of them who say, "I never gave up hope." I've had two. Um, um, oh, I may have lost you there. Can you still hear me, Mike? Okay. We've given two closures to people on deathbeds in my career that I've been a part of. So you might be going right to the wire. We helped Custer County at the beginning of this year close out a case. She was a Jane Doe of ours that ended up being a missing out of Custer County from 1982, and her twin sister got to find out what happened to her literally on her deathbed. Just don't give up, keep going. So we're 50 years down the road from the Bundy event, our Jane Doe. They don't expire. We have changes in technology, more and more databases, portals being out there. You've got the Doe Network, you've got the Charlie Project. There's another that's I'm just blanking on right now, but that I use frequently. Doe Network is really good. If you're not a member, get signed up on the Doe Network. There are so many. You got VICAP. I'm always on VICAP, and so there's all of these portals out there where there's investigators throwing information out saying, hey, does this sound familiar? This date, this time, this location. Um, you got to pay attention to that stuff. It's very helpful. Um, yeah, I think, yeah, familial DNA, we're using that in a few cases right now. As I say, technology, it just grows and grows and grows. And now we got this AI stuff. That's a little scary. Probably another presentation down the road. You want to move on to 8 there, Mike? We talked about the podcast. Yeah, somebody threw up the link there on Doe Network. Charlie Project is another one. The third one that I use frequently, it'll come to mind. I know it's saved here in my favorites. Apologies. Um, on public engagement, a lot of cops, I'll just say it, were real hesitant about, the media, we don't want to, how much do we want to put out there, and I get it. I mean, we can compromise the integrity of an investigation by giving too much. There's no doubt about that, because then what happens when we accidentally put our holdback information out there that was meant for the suspect, and we get someone to come in and they say, yeah, I use this knife and this is how I did it and blah, blah, blah. And then later they want to recant and say, well, I knew a knife was used because I read about it in the papers when you guys talked about it, that kind of thing. So you always want to have a certain amount of holdback information, and you want to be real selective with what you give the public. And even in this case, yes, we have some holdback information. Not because we think someone's going to come up and say, oh, I was a co-conspirator with Bundy, and we want to be able to test their knowledge. It's actually holdback information that works more towards victim witness statements, such that we can verify some of the information. We were expecting a couple of calls. Somebody's pulling up next to me. we were expecting a couple of calls to come in, and we wanted to make sure that they were credible when they came in. And so it's good to have that information. Um, so we used the podcast. We had meetings about this. We didn't just rush out and start telling everybody what we were doing. This was a very detailed, analyzed thing that involved our administration, our public information officer, and so forth. Make sure that you have what you want and you're comfortable with releasing it when you do. If you're going to put up so much as a flyer out there on on a person you're looking for, or a witness you're trying to find, or something like that, just make sure that there's no, like a bullet from a gun, there's no pulling it back. Once it's out there, it's out there. And as I mentioned, we did one podcast, and now there's a documentary and a book, right, based on that information, so that there's no going back. But don't be afraid to use the media. Don't be afraid to coordinate with them. I just talked to an investigator down in the Los Angeles area who made sure their suspect family member was at a media event where they were doing a press announcement, just so that they could film and have it all over the news, the body language, the micro expressions, all of that. They knew they were going to arrest this guy, and they wanted that on there. How does he react? He's looking down, talking to somebody over here during this part of the press release, but then when we mention that her body was found under a pile of rocks 6 blocks away from where he works, whoop, his eyes go straight down to the ground. We got that all on video, and guess what? It's public. You can't keep it out later. So that it's just weigh what you're going to release, how you're going to do it, the timing of it. You may do more than one release. In fact, we're going to do another podcast. In fact, we're also now, there's a production company that's doing a nationally syndicated podcast as well, to try to help us get answers and get out of this area a little bit. So always appeal to the public, give them a number to call, give them an email to reach out to. Hey, if this sounds familiar, a friend or family member, please reach out to us. Make sure they know too that no tip is so small. We want to hear from you. You're not bothering us. That kind of thing. That was really important in this case, because again, this was an era sometimes when reporting information to the police about a missing or something, it received mixed reactions. It's a runaway. They'll be back. They're crazy. They're nuts. They're hitchhiking. They shouldn't be hitchhiking in the first place. This kind of thing. We've talked to some family members that remember those days. So let's move on. Mike, looks like we're running towards the end of this here. I know I'm kind of babbling, but I want to get to the end of this so we can kind of recap.
Yep. This is the recap area for you.
So we talked about opportunistic intelligence. Make sure that you're paying attention. You're mining every lead. If it's a conversation, you're on patrol or in the field or sitting at home and somebody cold calls you, take notes. To ask them, are you cool if I record this interview? I've got a bad memory. I want to make sure I get all the facts, and feel free to use those cognitive techniques too when you're doing that, forwards and backwards. Source and credibility assessment. Don't be afraid to do that with victims, with witnesses. It's not an everyday thing that we put a victim on a polygraph machine. I don't mean to say, grill them and everyone's a liar or anything. But if there have been cases where, false police reporting is a real thing. There have been cases where we had to take a hard look at what was being said to us in a cold case, and other types of cases as well. In this particular case, I'll give you a real world example. There was a guy who said that he had information, wanted to be a witness about this Jane Doe abduction. And man, he had all the right facts, the right times, the right everything. But come to find out, he was writing a book. He was writing a book, and he wanted to make a lot of money. And as it turns out, when we started doing a background on him and finding out a little more information, that was his thing. That was his thing. And without going into all of it, there were 800 different reasons why we couldn't trust him by the end of it. And ultimately, his whole story fell apart. So physical corroboration. Finding the paper trails, triangulating. We talked about the gas receipts, the photo. We talked about looking at the video or audio excerpts. We had hundreds of hours of Bundy. We could listen to him. We can marry that up to his confession tapes. Number four, the historical context, reconstructing the scene. I always say, first thing you do, right? You go out to the scene, you get a look at it, because what you may be picturing in your mind as you're reading old police reports or whatever, it's entirely different when you get out there and you say, wow, heck, I never saw that there was a railroad trestle here in this report, or that there was a river, 600 feet from me. You got to go out to the scene. Mike and I visited a scene this past summer in an area here in Ada County, and there were two or three things that I came away with, and I had been out there a dozen times, but I had never been out there with Mike, who worked out there in the late 90s when this incident happened, and he's able to tell me things have changed. It puts a whole new spin on things. So in this case, we have the interstate that was actually under construction. So when Bundy's talking about being on the highway, investigators talking about I-84, and he's talking about old US 30. You got to get out there. You got to see what it looks like. Geographic profiling, that's one of my favorite things. Dr. Ken Osmo, we talked about him. Probably one of the first things that I would recommend if you look at geoprofiling, look at his videos on the Zodiac Killer. I think you can find him on YouTube. Really cool stuff. I had the privilege of meeting him in DC this past year at a convention, and he touched on some of that case and several others. If you haven't explored geoprofiling, I know a lot of older investigators will say, profiling this and that, and it's not a solve the case, a one and you're done. Oh, the profile says this, so that's the gospel. It's just another tool in your arsenal to use. But within that, geoprofiling is a really cool avenue of investigative exploration. I highly recommend you research that. And I mentioned the benchmarks, the trestle, the creek, the different things. Also, please don't go out there and try to dive for our Jane Doe. It's a treacherous bit of water. People have lost their lives in that water, in that exact area. There have been 3 recoveries that were found in the area where Bundy dumped this body since Bundy dumped the body. Archival research, number 6, we're working through the records. We're going systematic. We're documenting, we're cutting sup reports on everything we're doing. That's really important when you go down the rabbit hole of records and portals and what information I got, who's who in the zoo that's giving me information in ICB, all that stuff. A lot of times you'll find a great record, and if you're not documenting it later, you say, well, who gave me this? I can't even remember where I got this. So make sure you're taking notes, because if you're ever called to the stand, I guarantee you each and every record you're testifying to, there's going to have to be a paper trail, some kind of trail that leads back to how did you get your hands on this information. So that's one thing we didn't touch on. I just want to make sure that that's clear.
Hey, Tim,
Yes.
before you get to the never give up, would you touch briefly? We had a question in chat talking about working the story backwards. The question was, are you upfront about it? And maybe just a brief overview of how getting the truth when somebody can think of it in 3 dimensions. You want to just touch base on that just a bit?
Help me understand, Mike. You're saying getting the truth.
Yeah, so they're saying when you go, the question is, how do you go about walking the story backwards? Earlier you were talking about your linear process, and then you try to get them to go backwards to make sure they're able to.
Got it. So that's a great question, and I'm sorry, I should have touched on that a little more. And mind you, we teach an entire class on this. There's a lot to it. We do a 40-hour, and then we do a 40-hour plus for investigators. But when I get someone's statement, there's a baseline, right? So I take their statement, the who, what, when, where, why, how, from them to me, the way they want to do it. And if it takes a half hour and they want to talk about Aunt Sally's, dementia and everything else, and they go off in the weeds, let them take notes, listen to them, let them. Then go back to the beginning. You're going to keep going forward just the way they did. And those are clarifying questions, because you're probably going to have a few. When we talk to witnesses, victims, like I say, they can get off to the weeds sometimes, right? So, you're going to have questions as you go along. So I'll go chronologically again, make sure I have the story right and that I have it in the right chronology, and make sure that I don't have any big gaps. that I'll do that, and I might even do that a second time before I try going backwards. I want to make sure I have everything in line as best I can in the time I have before I go backwards. And I'm usually going to do a backwards chronology when there are cognitive issues. Um, I don't remember the color of the car. I don't remember if we were on Highway 55 or Highway 21. Those gaps, those inconvenient gaps where you're like, man, if only this witness could remember this, those are the really cool things that you'll get from going backwards and doing a cognitive interview, which again, there's a little more to it. When I say cognitive interview, there's types of questions, timing of questions. But when you're going backwards, they'll say, oh, we stopped at Hilltop Market, so we had to have been on Highway 21. Oh, it was a yellow car. That's right, because I remember my dad had one. So you'll get a lot of those gaps when you go backwards. So a technique that I highly recommend. Did that answer the question kind of? Okay. And again, all of you are more than welcome to get with me offline. Mike has my information if you want to do some follow-up stuff. I know we're kind of going through this quick. Never give up mindset. Re-reviewing old cases, second set of eyes. Always be big enough to see how small you are. I frequently hand off my own reports to people because I miss stuff that folks, I've written reports wherein I'm essentially all the information is there. I went and got it, put it in there, and somebody else reads my report and says, "Well, Tim, if this, then that, and if that, then this. So how come you didn't go do?" And it's like, holy cow, it was in my own report. So second set of eyes doesn't hurt anything. Please have your stuff peer reviewed. Make sure that you're not becoming subjective or whatever. Sometimes we meet a person who's maybe a suspect at first, but what they absolutely are is your quintessential a-hole, and you'd like nothing better than see them go off to prison at some point in their life, but they're not the one that did it. You know what I mean? So make sure that you're not falling into that trap, which can happen to the best of us. Just make sure. I've written 2 reports detailing false confessions that I received. And so I'll fall on my sword right now, where I wrote a sup report telling the district attorney I think he falsely confessed to me. I'd like these charges dismissed. One was a gentleman I found out was high functioning, but a little on the spectrum, you might say. And we ended up working that case, getting video surveillance that proved who did it. It was a high-end residential burglary, and he had nothing to do with it, but he knew the guy. So that's how he kind of put himself in there. Another one, I worked with the Innocence Project and had to write something that said we made a mistake. I got a 9-0 Supreme Court ruling finding this man. It wasn't our case; it was someone else's. Was
So
innocent,
Tim,
and
just
then yeah.
to give you that final opportunity, we're wrapping up here in a few minutes, but I'd like you to uh, leave us with your bits of final golden wisdom, and then I'd like to give an opportunity for some folks to ask questions if they'd like.
Well, that's a
So,
good thing, and thankfully, my golden wisdom's really short. I don't have a lot of golden wisdom, Mike. So we'll get into questions real
okay.
quick. My golden wisdom would just simply be never give up.
Yep,
Just what it says at the end, never give up. Use the public. Don't be afraid to use your resources. Don't be afraid to have a second set of eyes. Don't be afraid to be big enough to see how small you are, and recognize that we're all in this together. You have a lot of help out there, and never give up. So with
excellent.
that, yeah.
All right. Anybody want to open it up? You can put it in chat, or if you have a question for Tim, I'm going to go ahead and put myself on mute so I don't interrupt.
Hey, Tim, this is Ryan in Colorado.
All
Great
right.
presentation. Really enjoyed it. And I like what you said about your reports missing some things. We all have to check our ego at the door sometimes and get people to review things. I actually have done surveillance work for over 40 years and teach a class to our association here. And a guy that's been doing PI work for 2 years in the class said, you know what, this is something that you could use for surveillance. And I went, you're absolutely right. That's a great tool. I've always been of the mindset, I don't care how long you're in the business. I enjoy learning from you, hopefully as much as you enjoy learning from me.
Absolutely. Great stuff. Yeah, thank you, Ryan. I 100% agree with you. And I'm finding that more and more, especially today. I was never computer savvy at any point in my life, and I'm certainly not now. So I get these younger people in some of our classes that we do that, they're talking about AI and different technologies, and holy cow. Yeah, I have a lot to learn about technology, and that's really, I think, the direction where a lot of our investigative strategies are going to be going ultimately.
Any
But it
other?
never. Oh, go
Oh,
ahead.
no, go ahead. I just wanted, any other folks want to have an opportunity to ask a question or type one? I want to give you that chance too.
If there's someone thinking of one that's typed, I'll just say in the meantime, we were just talking about technology. It never negates getting up and knocking on doors. We're always going to be gumshoes, sleuths. Our bread and butter is talking to people. We are getting out on the streets, walking around, knocking on doors. That's really, I think, where it starts, where it begins, and where it ends. There was and I'll make this quick. I know we're running out of time, Mike. There was a sergeant I had 20 years ago, and he was a cold case investigator at one point, and he had to go down to San Francisco PD to follow up on a case, and they had a banner on the second floor of SFPD, was where all the old crusty investigators were, and it said GoyaCon. It was an acronym, and everybody would go around saying GoyaCon. They'd take a sip of their coffee, GoyaCon, and somebody would leave. And finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He said, "What's GoyaCon mean?" And this old investigator said, "It means get off your ass, knock on doors." And so for everybody, I don't know if there's any questions left or whatever, but that's my final, my parting acronym, GoyaCon.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is a great presentation. If you guys want to reach out to me, and I'll put you in touch with Tim. Also, if you reach out to me or through PIAI board, we will get you the slide deck to help you with that guide, because it's a great, as you can tell, a great way to work on your current cases, as well as if you get historical cases, because the facts that Tim just showed us and shared with us, they apply in all of them. So with that, Tim, thank you for your time today. Very much appreciate it. And if there's no other questions, reach out if you need it, and we'll go ahead and close the thing today. It says, hey, Mike, do you know how I could access the video recording? Stephen, off the top of my head, I know that it's recorded. I'll create a file. I'll talk with our team that has done it before, and we'll get it available to you.
All right, GoyaCon, guys. All right, I'm going to sign off, Mike. Thanks for having me,
Thanks,
everybody.
guys. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.